This is the international news on Atlantic Television Network. First, the headlines. Congo, President Tshisekedi appoints country's first female prime minister. Israel authorities say misidentification led to Gaza strikes. Taiwan, powerful earthquake damages buildings, highway, killing 7. Ukraine, government reduces military conscription age from 27 to 25. United States, Biden, Jinping discuss Taiwan, our security. Australia, gunshot wound prompts police to review car crash case.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring on sport news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economic, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today, only on ATN.
And now the news in details. Senegal inaugurated Africa's youngest elected leader as president on Tuesday as the 44-year-old and previously little-known Bassirou Diomaye Faye completed a dramatic ascent from prison to palace within weeks. Hours later, Ousmane Sonko, the popular opposition figure who helped catapult him to victory, was named as the country's new prime minister. Last month's election tested Senegal's reputation as a stable democracy in West Africa, a region rocked in recent years by coups and attempted coups. Both Faye and Sonko were released from prison less than 2 weeks before the vote, following a political amnesty announced by outgoing President Macky Sall. Their arrest had sparked months of protest and concerns that Sall would seek a third term in office despite term limits. Rights groups said dozens were killed and about 1,000 were jailed. In his first speech as president, Faye remembered those killed and arrested during the protests and promised to deliver greater sovereignty for Senegal, working to build prosperity. I am aware that the results of the elections express a profound desire for systemic change, he said. Through my election, the Senegalese people have committed to building a sovereign, just and prosperous Senegal in progressing Africa. This is the first elected office for Faye, a former tax inspector. His rise has reflected widespread frustration among Senegal's youth with the country's direction, a common sentiment across Africa, which has the world's youngest population and a number of leaders widely accused of clinging to power for decades. Faye campaigned on promises to clean up corruption. Ahead of the election, he released a declaration of his assets and called on other candidates to do the same. It listed a home in Dakar and land outside the capital, and in his small hometown, his bank accounts totaled roughly $6,000. A practicing Muslim, Faye has 2 wives, both of whom were present on Tuesday. Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi on Monday appointed the country's first female prime minister, fulfilling a campaign promise and taking an important step towards the formation of a new government after his re-election late last year. Former planning minister Judith Suminwa Tukuluka will step into the role at a time of worsening violence in the country's mineral-rich east, which borders Rwanda. The long-running conflict has displaced more than 7 million people, according to the United Nations, making it one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Tuluka promised to work peace and Development in her first speech on state television following her appointment. Still, it could be months before a new government is formed, as the process requires intensive negotiations with the many political parties. My thoughts go out to the East and to all corners of the country, which today are facing conflicts with enemies who sometimes are hidden, She said, referring to the conflict that involves many armed groups, including some believed to be backed by Rwanda's military. I'm thinking of all those people, and my heart goes out to them. Far from the nation's capital, Kinshasa, Eastern Congo has long been overrun by more than 120 armed groups seeking a share of the region's gold and other resources as they carry out mass killings. Both regional and UN peacekeepers have been asked to leave Congo after the government accused them of failing to resolve the conflict. Violence has only continued to worsen as the withdrawal of personnel begins and Congolese authorities move into their positions. Israel police said an Arab resident from northern Israel carried out a car ramming attack, wounding 4 police officers and attempting to stab security forces at a checkpoint before he was killed by police. The attack, carried out by a 26-year-old Palestinian citizen of Israel from the Arab town of Tyre, occurred around 2 a.m. Wednesday. The police were lightly wounded and evacuated for medical treatment. Palestinian citizens make up around 20% of Israel's population. They have citizenship, including the right to vote, but face widespread discrimination. They have close family ties to Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza and largely support the Palestinian cause, leading some Israelis to view them with suspicion. The attacks came amid heightened Israeli-Palestinian tensions during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The Hamas militant group has called on Palestinians to attack Israelis during the month-long holiday. There have been several stabbing and ramming attacks at checkpoints during Ramadan and since the start of the war. Violence has surged in the occupied West Bank since Hamas's October 7 attack triggered the war in Gaza. Israel's military chief says a deadly Israeli strike that killed 7 aid workers in the Gaza Strip was the result of a misidentification in complex conditions. Announcing the results of a preliminary investigation early Wednesday, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi expressed remorse over the killings and called the event a grave mistake. It was a mistake that followed a misidentification at night during a war in very complex conditions. It shouldn't have happened, he said. He gave no further details. He said an independent body would conduct a thorough investigation that would be completed in the coming days and said the Army appreciates the important work of the World Central Kitchen. He said the conclusions of the independent investigation would be implemented immediately and shared with World Central Kitchen and other relevant international organizations. We see great importance in the continued delivery of humanitarian aid, and we will keep working to facilitate this vital effort, he said. World Central Kitchen said it had coordinated with the Israeli military over the movement of its cars. 3 vehicles that were moving at large distances apart were hit in succession. They were left incinerated and mangled, indicating multiple targeted strikes. At least one of the vehicles had the charity's logo printed across the roof to make it identifiable from the air, and the ordnance punched a large hole through the roof. The strikes on the charity's convoy highlighted what critics say is Israel's indiscriminate bombing and lack of regard for civilian casualties in Gaza. Israeli authorities blame Hamas militants for civilian death because the fighters operate in populated areas. Taiwan's strongest earthquake in a quarter-century rocked the island during the morning rush hour Wednesday, damaging buildings and highways and leaving 7 people dead. In the capital, Taipei, tiles fell from other buildings as the earthquake shook the city, and schools evacuated their students to sports fields, equipping them with yellow safety helmets. Some children covered themselves with textbooks to guard against falling objects as aftershocks continued. Afterward, a 5-story building in Hualien County near the offshore epicenter was left leaning at a 45-degree angle with its first floor collapsed. Taiwan's National Fire Agency said 7 people died in the quake, which struck just before 8 a.m., the local United Daily News reported. 3 hikers died in rock slides in Taroko National Park, and a van driver died in the same area after boulders hit the vehicle. Government statistics showed 736 people were injured and 77 stranded. The quake and aftershocks also caused 24 landslides and damage to 35 roads, bridges, and tunnels. Taiwan's earthquake monitoring agency said the quake was 7.2 magnitude, while the U.S. Geological Survey put it at 7.4. It struck about 18 kilometers southwest of Hualien and was about 35 kilometers deep. Multiple aftershocks followed, and the USGS said one of the subsequent quakes was 6.5 magnitude and 11.8 kilometers deep. Shallower quakes tend to cause more surface damage. The earthquake triggered a tsunami warning that was later lifted. North Korea said Wednesday it had tested a new hypersonic intermediate-range missile powered with solid propellant, extending a run of weapons tests that's deepening a nuclear standoff with neighbors and the United States. With the supposed success of the demonstration, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un declared his country had acquired the ability to build solid-fuel nuclear-capable missiles of all ranges as he pursues an arsenal that can credibly threaten rivals in Asia and the United States. But the South Korean military said the North is exaggerating the success of the test and its overall missile prowess. The report by North Korean state media came a day after the South Korean and Japanese militaries detected a missile launched from near the North's capital towards its eastern sea. State media said the test was supervised by Kim, who described the Hwasong-16B missile as a key piece of his nuclear deterrent. He vowed to further build up to counter his enemies, a reference to the United States, South Korea, and Japan. In recent years, North Korea has been developing more missiles with built-in solid propellants. Such weapons are easier to move and hide and can be launched quicker than liquid propellant missiles, which need to be fueled before launch and cannot stay fueled for long periods of time. North Korea tested a solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile for the first time last year, adding to its arsenal a long-range weapon targeting the U.S. mainland. The country also has an extensive lineup of short-range and mid-range solid-fuel missiles that can be fired from land vehicles, ships, and submarines are potentially capable of hitting targets throughout South Korea and Japan. In recent months, the North demonstrated some of these missiles in drills it described as simulated nuclear strikes. Since 2021, it has also been testing hypersonic weapons designed to fly at more than 5 times the speed of sound. If perfected, such systems could potentially pose a challenge to regional missile defense systems because of their speed and maneuverability. However, it is unclear whether these missiles are consistently flying at the speed of the North claims. A crowd of people, some weeping, gathered at a rain-soaked amusement park in South Korea to bid farewell to a beloved giant panda before her departure to China on Wednesday. Fubao has been a major attraction at the Everland theme park near Seoul since she was born there in 2020 to pandas Ai Bao and Li Bao, who came from China in 2016 on a 15-year lease program. China sends pandas abroad as a sign of goodwill but maintains ownership over the animals and their cubs. Decades of conservation efforts in the wild and study in captivity saved the species from extinction, increasing its population from fewer than 1,000 at a time to more than 1,800 in the wild and in captivity. On Wednesday, many pandas fans in South Korea braved rain to attend a farewell ceremony at the Everland Park for Fubao, who was to be flown to China later in the day. As a truck carrying Fubao slowly moved to a plaza in the rain, many visitors wearing raincoats or holding umbrellas waved flags, shouted their parting messages, and took photos with their mobile phones. Some loudly cried or wiped away tears. The truck was decorated with a huge picture of Fubao and the message, "It was a miracle that we met you." Thank you, Fubao. But she wasn't shown to the public on Wednesday. The park last showed her to the public on March 3rd. You are our baby panda forever, even if 10 years pass or 100 years pass, zookeeper Kang Chia-won said in a speech during the ceremony. Dear all, Fubao is now leaving. Please remember Fubao for a long, long time, and please don't cry much. Fubao's mother, Bao, gave birth last year to female twin cubs, the first panda twins born in South Korea. Indonesian President-elect Prabowo Subianto said he wants to further strengthen relations with Japan as he met with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on Wednesday on the heels of a visit to China. Subianto, who is currently Defense Minister, told Kishida that the two countries are longtime friends who have built a cooperative relationship and that he hoped to further strengthen the relationship. Japan has been seeking closer ties with Southeast Asian countries, especially in maritime security and defense in the face of China's increasingly assertive military presence. Subianto, who will succeed Joko Widodo in October, chose Beijing for his first official overseas trip after his February election victory in a bid to emphasize steady ties with China amid rising tensions in the South China Sea, where China and the Philippines have had repeated high seas confrontation. In his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, Subianto pledged a continued friendly policy towards China. China is Indonesia's largest trading partner, with Beijing investing in major infrastructure projects, and Indonesia has maintained a relatively neutral stance amid rising tensions between China and the Philippines over rival territorial claims in the South China Sea. Kishida welcomed Subianto's early visit to Tokyo, telling his future counterpart that the two countries are longtime friends that share basic values and principles, and that Japan hoped to further strengthen cooperation in regional and global issues as comprehensive and strategic partners. Kishida said Japan hopes to contribute to Indonesia's development in areas including infrastructure and energy while stepping up cooperation in security and defense. Kishida's meeting with Subianto comes just a week before the Japanese leader will travel to Washington for a summit with U.S. President Joe Biden and three-way talks that will also include Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., at which the leaders are expected to discuss further reinforcing security ties. Mourners gathered outside a southern Finland school Wednesday, a day after a shooter killed a 12-year-old boy and seriously wounded two girls the same age. The suspect, a sixth grader who attended the school, was apprehended less than an hour later. The attack shocked the Nordic nation, where Finnish blue and white flags were hoisted at half-mast, and scores of people, including parents, teachers and fellow students, laid flowers and lit candles in the snowy landscape. Police said one of the wounded girls has a dual Finland-Kosovo citizenship. The shooter and the victims were all classmates. On Tuesday, heavily armed police cordoned off the Vetola school, an 800-student secondary school in the city of Vantaa, just outside Helsinki. Police said the boy died instantly after being shot. The suspect was detained in the Helsinki area less than an hour after the shooting with a handgun in his possession. The gun was licensed to a relative of the suspect who was not immediately identified. Police said he admitted to the shooting in an initial police hearing, but there was no immediate word of the motive. The minimum age of criminal liability in Finland is 15 years, which means the suspect cannot be formally arrested. A suspect younger than 15 can only be questioned by the police before they are handed over to child welfare authorities. Finns often complain their country is portrayed as a gloomy northern outpost of Europe, where long, dark winters drive people to binge drinking, suicide, or random outbursts of violence. Finland has witnessed two major deadly school shootings in 2007 and 2008. In their wake, the country tightened its gun laws, raising the minimum age for firearm ownership and giving police greater powers to perform background checks on individuals applying for a gun license. The nation of 5.6 million has more than 1.5 million licensed firearms and about 430,000 license holders. According to the Finnish Interior Ministry, hunting and gun ownership are deeply rooted traditions in this sparsely populated northern European country. A fire engulfed an Istanbul nightclub Tuesday during renovations, trapping workers and employees inside and killing at least 29 people, officials and reports said. Several people, including managers of the club, were detained for questioning. One person was being treated at a hospital with serious injuries, the Istanbul governor's office said in a statement. The Masquerade nightclub, which was closed for renovations, was located on the ground and basement floors of a 16-story residential building in the Besiktas district on the European side of the city, bisected by the Bosphorus Strait. The fire reached the third floor of the building before it was extinguished. Video footage of the blaze showed. Governor Davut Gül told reporters at the scene that the cause of the fire was under investigation and that victims were believed to be people involved in the renovation work. The private news agency identified one of the victims as a nightclub employee. Video from the scene showed flames billowing from the side of the building, firefighters dousing an entrance to the club, and others carrying a victim on a stretcher towards an ambulance. Several firefighting trucks were called to the scene. Press said some of the victims died in hospital after being pulled out of the blaze. Authorities detained 8 people for questioning, including managers of the club and one person in charge of the renovations. Gül's office said a club official could not be reached for comment. The government appointed 3 prosecutors and several investigators to probe the case. The nightclub, which had a capacity to host up 4,000 guests according to its website, was closed for the holy Muslim month of Ramadan. Its owners were trying to complete the renovation work in time for next week's Eid holiday, which follows the month of fasting. See you on April 10th, the club said in a message posted on its website. Police sealed off the area while power and natural gas to the neighborhood was cut off as a safety precaution. Residents were safely evacuated from the building. Mayor Ekrem Imamoglu, who was re-elected in local elections on Sunday, said authorities were inspecting the entire building to assess its safety. The nightclub had not obtained the necessary permit to undertake construction and renovations, the mayor said. President Vladimir Putin vowed Tuesday to track down the masterminds of the Moscow concert hall attack that left 144 people dead in the worst assault on Russian soil in 2 decades, and urged its law enforcement agencies to tighten security at mass gatherings. Putin has repeatedly sought to link the March 22 killings to Ukraine and the West, despite the Islamic State group's claim of responsibility and Kyiv's vehement denial, as well as the U.S. government warning to Moscow days earlier of an imminent attack. Speaking at a meeting with top officials of the Interior Ministry that oversees the nation's police force, Putin said it is important to determine not only the perpetrators of this outrage, but all the links in the chain and its beneficiaries. He added, in an apparent threat of retaliation, those who use this weapon against Russia should realize it is a double-edged weapon. Putin said that the masterminds of the concert hall raid sought to sow discord and panic, strife and hatred in our country in order to break up Russia from within, adding that we mustn't allow them to do that. It is inadmissible to use the tragic event to provoke ethnic tensions, xenophobia and Islamophobia, he said. Russian security agencies have detained 4 suspects, all of them citizens of Tajikistan, and 7 other alleged accomplices. The attackers fueled anti-migrant sentiments and drawn calls from Russian hawks to limit immigration, despite the fact that the Russian economy strongly depends on such workers, most of them from ex-Soviet nations in Central Asia, including Tajikistan. Russian media reported that authorities have strengthened controls over migrants following the attack. Putin urged the Interior Ministry to tighten controls on illegal migration, and close loopholes in existing procedures that allow people with a criminal past to get work permits and even Russian citizenship. Ukraine on Wednesday lowered the military conscription age from 27 to 25 in an effort to replenish its depleted ranks after more than 2 years of war following Russia's full-scale invasion. The new mobilization law came into force a day after Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky signed it. Ukraine's parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, passed it last year. It was not immediately clear why Zelensky took so long to sign the measure into law. He didn't make any public comment about it, and officials did not say how many new soldiers the country expected to gain or for which units. Conscription has been a sensitive matter in Ukraine for many months, amid a growing shortage of infantry on top of a severe ammunition shortfall that has handed Russia the battlefield initiative. Russia's own problems with manpower and planning have so far prevented it from taking full advantage of its edge. The average age of Ukrainian soldiers, like those on the Russian side, is around 40, military analysts said. Some Ukrainians worry that taking young adults out of the workforce will backfire by further harming the war-ravaged economy, but the problem reportedly has become acute as Kyiv girds for an expected summer offensive by the Kremlin's forces. Zelensky has rarely mentioned the mobilization issue, and Parliament has held long and inconclusive debates about it in recent months. Last December, Zelensky said Ukraine's military wanted to mobilize up to 500,000 more troops, but he said he had asked the top brass to spell out the details on what is a very sensitive matter before deciding whether to grant their wish. Such a major mobilization would cost Ukraine the equivalent of $13.4 billion, Zelensky said at the time. Other aspects to be considered include whether troops currently on the front would be rotated or allowed home leave, he said. Enterprise Minister Simon Coveney, one of Ireland's highest-profile government members, announced Tuesday he is stepping down from the government ahead of the election of a new national leader. Coveney, 51, developed a high international profile when he served as Ireland's foreign minister between 2017 and 2022 during the turmoil over the UK's departure from the European Union. Brexit had huge implications for Ireland, an EU member that shares a border with the UK's Northern Ireland. Coveney has been Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment since December 2022. Prime Minister Leo Varadkar stepped down last month as head of the centre-right Fine Gael party, part of Ireland's coalition government, for personal and political reasons. His replacement, 37-year-old Simon Harris, is due to be confirmed as Ireland's youngest Prime Minister, or Taoiseach Seach, next week by Ireland's Parliament. Dale Coveney, a member of Fine Gael, said on social network X that he had told Harris that I would not be making myself available to serve in cabinet when the Dáil resumes next week. Coveney told Irish broadcaster RTE that stepping aside would make it easier for Harris to promote new talent in the party. He said he plans to remain in Parliament as the lawmaker for Cork South Central. Portugal's new centre-right minority government took office Tuesday, days after its fast test in Parliament exposed both the pitfalls and the opportunities it faces following a radical right populist party's sudden surge in support in a recent general election. Only one of the 17 ministers sworn in at a ceremony in Lisbon's 19th century Ajuda National Palace has previous top-level government experience. Even Prime Minister Luis Montenegro, who promised a cabinet made up of specialists from outside the usual political circles, has never sat in government before. Some key members of the cabinet have spent time in Brussels and are familiar with the European Union's corridors of power. They include Foreign Minister Paulo Rangel and Defense Minister Nuno Melo, who were European lawmakers from 2009. Portugal, a country of 10.3 million people, is receiving more than 22 billion euros through 2026 from the EU to fuel growth and enable economic reforms. Finance Minister Joaquim Miranda Samento, a Lisbon University professor, is likely to have a prominent role as the new administration seeks to keep a lead on what in the past has been Rio's government overspending. He wants fiscal policies to help drive investment and saving. Montenegro, the new prime minister, vowed to deliver on his election promises of lower taxes, higher salaries and pensions, and improved public services by making the economy more competitive and the government more efficient. The government will lower corporate tax from 21% to 15% over the next 3 years, he said in a speech. An alliance led by the Social Democratic Party clinched a narrow win in the last month's election, capturing 80 seats in the 230-seat National Assembly, Portugal's parliament. The center-left Socialist Party, which for decades has alternated in power with the Social Democrats, collected 78 seats. You are watching the international news on Atlantic Television Network. We return after this break.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring all sport news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today. Only on ATN. From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring all sport news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So catch all the updates on the happenings around the globe. Stay focused on the fact today. Only on ATN.
Welcome back. This is the international news on Atlantic Television Network. Now the rest of our stories. Canada and other nations' embassies will present a joint formal diplomatic rebuke to the Israeli Foreign Ministry over the country's killing of 7 aid workers in Gaza, a senior Canadian government official said. A top official with Canada's Global Affairs Department has also made a formal representation to Israel ambassador to Canada on Tuesday, the official said, speaking on condition of anonymity as they were not authorized to publicly discuss the matter. The Canadian official, which did not elaborate on which nations would take part in the formal rebuke known as the March, but the dead from Monday night's strikes included a Canadian-American dual national, a Palestinian, 3 British citizens, and Polish and Australian nationals. Those Western countries have been key backers of Israel's nearly 6-month-old offensive in Gaza, and several of them sharply condemned the killings. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu acknowledged that the military had carried out the unintended strike on innocent people. He said officials were investigating and would work to ensure it did not happen again. Dujarric was asked what message is to Israel. The message is let to humanitarian workers to their jobs. They need to be able to do it in safety. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping discussed Taiwan artificial intelligence and security issues Tuesday in a call meant to demonstrate a return to regular leader-to-leader dialogue between the two powers. The call, described by the White House as candid and constructive, was the leaders' first conversation since their November summit in California produced renewed ties between the two nations' militaries and a promise of enhanced cooperation on stemming the flow of deadly fentanyl and its precursors from China. Xi told Biden that the two countries should adhere to the bottom line of no clash, no confrontation as one of the principles for this year. We should prioritize stability, not provoke troubles, not cross lines, but maintain the overall stability of China-U.S. relations, Xi said, according to press. The state broadcaster, the roughly 105-minute call, kicks off several weeks of high-level engagements between the two countries, with Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen set to travel to China on Thursday and Secretary of State Antony Blinken to follow in the weeks ahead. Biden has pressed for sustained interactions at all levels of government, believing it is key to keeping competition between the two massive economies and nuclear-armed powers from escalating to direct conflict. While in-person summits take place perhaps once a year, officials said both Washington and Beijing recognize the value of more frequent engagements between the leaders. The two leaders discussed Taiwan ahead of next month's inauguration in Lai Ching-te, the island's president-elect, who has vowed to safeguard its de facto independence from China and further align it with other democracies. Biden reaffirmed the United States' long-standing One China policy and reiterated that the U.S. opposes any coercive means to bring Taiwan under Beijing's control. China considers Taiwan a domestic matter and has vigorously protested U.S. support for the island. The United States military believes Israel carried out the recent airstrike on Iran's consulate in Syria and that several senior leaders of the Revolutionary Guard were present. Pentagon spokeswoman Sabrina Singh said Tuesday that it is the U.S. assessment that Israel conducted the strike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus and that there were a handful of IRGC top leaders there. Israel, which has repeatedly targeted Iranian officers in Syria and in Lebanon, did not comment on Monday's attack. Iran has vowed to respond to the attack that killed 12 people, including 2 Iranian generals and a member of the Lebanese militant Hezbollah group, which is backed by Iran. Israel, increasingly impatient with months of cross-border fighting with Hezbollah, has warned of the possibility of a full-fledged war. The U.S. National Security Council said the United States played no role in the strike in Damascus and did not know of it ahead of time. The United Nations says Israel's heartbreaking killing of 7 aid workers in airstrikes is the inevitable result of the way this war is currently being conducted, pointing to the killing of more than 180 humanitarian workers so far. The World Central Kitchen staff's recent death show a disregard for international humanitarian law and a disregard for the protection of humanitarian workers that the law requires, UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric told reporters Tuesday. At least one of the vehicles had the charity's logo printed across its roof to make it identifiable from the air, and the ordnance punched a large hole through the roof. 3 vehicles moving at large distances apart were hit in succession. They were left incinerated and mangled, indicating multiple targeted strikes. Dujarric said Sigrid Kaag, the senior UN humanitarian and reconstruction coordinator for Gaza, met with the World Central Kitchen's team Monday in Gaza's southern city of Rafah just hours before they were killed. Kaag is appalled at the attack, Dujarric said. World Central Kitchen, which is a partner of the UN World Food Programme, has suspended operations in the region along with other aid organizations, dealing a blow to the delivery of desperately needed aid to Gaza's 2.3 million hungry people, including hundreds of thousands of people who are near starvation. Israel has called the airstrikes an accident and says it is investigating. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says his Israeli counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu has provided an undertaking for full transparency in an investigation of how 7 aid workers, including an Australian woman, who were killed by airstrikes in Gaza. Albanese said he had expressed Australia's anger and concern over Zomi Francom's death in a phone call with Netanyahu on Wednesday. I emphasize the importance of full accountability and transparency, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has committed to full transparency about how this tragedy could possibly have occurred. Albanese told reporters, "There is a need for a thorough investigation into what happened here, and Prime Minister Netanyahu committed to that," Albanese added. Israel has accepted responsibility for the attack on a World Central Kitchen aid convoy, and the consequent investigation must be very fast, immediate, clear and transparent, Albanese said. "I convey to Prime Minister Netanyahu in very clear terms that Australians were outraged by this death, by this tragedy of this fine Australian," Albanese said. "This is an Australian who we can all be proud of, someone who not only was in Gaza assisting people in need, but had in the past provided support for people in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, here in Australia after the bushfires. This was someone who was clearly committed to benefit her fellow humanity, and someone whose loss is very deeply felt by her family, but I think felt by Australians as well," Albanese added. A travel company and a Melbourne private school have been charged over the death of a student who became unwell on a school trip. The Kilvinton Grammar School student Lachlan Cook, 16, suffered diabetes complications during a trip to Vietnam in September 2019 and later died in hospital in Melbourne. His death was found to have been preventable by a coroner in 2023. A court previously heard the boy had been self-managing his type 1 diabetes when he fell ill and was taken to hospital 24 hours after first showing symptoms. He suffered a heart attack and was flown back to the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne with his life support switched off in October 2019. On Wednesday, WorkSafe said it has charged the school and the travel company World Challenge Expedition Pty Limited. The World Travel Expedition has been charged with 3 counts of failing to ensure that persons other than employees were not exposed to health and safety risk under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The regulator alleges the company failed so far as was reasonably practicable to reduce the risk of illness or death to participating students, including those with diabetes. The school is also facing 1 charge of failing to ensure that persons other than employees were not exposed to health and safety risks, WorkSafe said. A man's death on a Queensland property was initially treated as a car crash fatality by police, who have now charged another man with manslaughter after the discovery of a gunshot wound during the post-mortem process. Investigators initially believed a 21-year-old Nanango man died in the 21 March crash after hitting a fence pole on a private property in Kingaroy Barker's Creek Road at Bowie near Kangaroo. But after allegedly discovering a gunshot wound on his upper body, police have charged a 38-year-old Kingaroy man with 1 count of manslaughter and insecure storage of weapons. Police believe the 21-year-old had arrived at the property about 11:30 p.m. that night and was later located in his car unconscious. Police said a second man, believed to be a passenger, fled the vehicle before emergency services arrived. The Queensland Ambulance Service transported the unconscious man to hospital, where he later died. Det Acting Inspector Renee Garski said the man was not known to those living at the property. Garski said investigations were continuing over the incident. As a result of post-mortem investigations, it was identified that a male person sustained a gunshot wound to the upper body, she alleged. It is a horrific set of circumstances for emergency service to respond to any incident involving the death of a person. And that's the international news for today. Before we go, another look at the major stories. Congo, President Tshisekedi appoints country's first female prime minister. Israel authorities says misidentification led to Gaza strikes. Taiwan, powerful earthquake damages buildings, highways, killing 7. Ukraine, government reduces military conscription age from 27 to 25. United States, Biden and Jinping discuss Taiwan our security. Australia, gunshot wound prompts police to review car crash case. I am Valentina Lawrence. Thank you for watching. You can follow us on all our social media platforms: on X, formerly Twitter, Atlantic TV Net, Facebook and YouTube, Atlantic Television Network, Instagram, Atlantic TV Network, or you can watch us live on our website, atlanticnetwork.tv. Peace and unity are the pathways to progress. Thank you. Have a lovely afternoon.